Sean Diddy Combs is facing more explosive allegations in a bombshell lawsuit. This one filed by his reportedly former executive assistant, who claims he was coerced into setting up drug-fueled parties and even performing degrading acts to prove his loyalty to the music mogul. We're going to break down these latest shocking details of alleged sexual coercion, abuse, and manipulation, and how this adds to the mounting legal troubles for Sean Diddy Combs. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, it is another day, and it is another Diddy lawsuit. Yep, this time from a man who says he was the former executive assistant of the disgraced rapper and music producer, and he is accusing Diddy of essentially sexual coercion, abuse, battery, sex trafficking, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And it all stems, he says, from what happened at these lavish drug-fueled nights called Wild King Nights. So this 32-page lawsuit, which was reviewed by multiple outlets, including Rolling Stone, was apparently filed in Los Angeles by a man named Phillip Pines, who says he worked for Diddy from 2019 to 2021. So actually more recent than some other suits we've seen against Sean Combs that have been in the early 2000s or even the 90s. But according to reporting in the suit, Pines is alleging a few different things here. Now, before we even get into it, and there is a lot to get into, you might be wondering, what the heck does that name mean? What are we talking about when we said Wild King Nights? Well, part of this lawsuit alleges that Pines had to prove his loyalty to Sean Combs, who was dubbed the King, by performing sex acts for him, hence the name Wild King Nights. The suit even reportedly says that Pines was treated, quote, like an animal playing fetch in order to prove his loyalty. And by the way, that is just one of the many disturbing details in this lawsuit. So to help me break it down, I want to bring on friend of the show, defense attorney Mauricio Padilla, who has been our go-to as we've been covering the Sean Combs saga. Mauricio, so good to see you. Thanks so much. Happy holidays. Before we get into the
as well.
Yeah, thank you. Before we get into the specifics here, you know, I feel like we're almost becoming numb to the lawsuit after the lawsuit after the lawsuit. And do all of the allegations against Combs so far that we've seen make the claims here, these new claims, do you think it makes it more or less true? In other words, does the fact that a lawsuit comes out in late 2024, as opposed to maybe at the beginning of the year or right after he was arrested, but, you know, on the heels of all the allegations so far, how should we all be thinking about yet another lawsuit against Sean Combs?
I think little by little, it's chipping away at whatever he's got left as far as reputation-wise. I mean, I think when I read it, the biggest key factor for me is that we're talking about somebody that was under his employ, if that allegation is true. If this was actually somebody that was employed by him from 2019 to 2021, he's got a problem on his hands, because it's not just a Jane Doe or John Doe or a random person. This is someone that was, you know, in his circle, under his employ. So the allegations are serious. And as we've seen, could be foreshadowing testimony in the criminal case. When I read this, I can't fathom that the prosecutors aren't going to want to talk to him or include him, especially regarding the allegations of scrubbing his cell phone and other devices for evidence, things of that nature, that when you read it, it really, you know, it goes hand in hand with the indictment.
I want to get into that, especially the time frame, because let's keep this in mind. Prosecutors have alleged criminal conduct from 2008 to 2024. This would be right in that time frame. So let's everybody keep that in mind. We'll talk more about it, but I have to get into a little bit more of these allegations, starting with what Pines says he was in charge of doing for these parties. What was his job? So one of the things Pines alleges here is that he was responsible for setting up these gatherings, which reportedly involved heavy usage of various illegal drugs and alcohol and sexual paraphernalia. And sometimes it would take place inside of Diddy's bedroom. He says that Diddy instructed him to prepare spaces with these specific items. Quote, plaintiff was instructed by Sean Combs on multiple occasions to ensure his personal bedroom and or various hotel rooms were set up with red lights, ice buckets, alcohol, marijuana joints, honey packs for male libido, baby oil, Astroglide, towels, illegal drugs, and I'm sorry to say this, power banger sex machines. That's the way it's categorized. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Astroglide is a lubricant, and also on that list allegedly was an erectile dysfunction drug called Cialis and the morning after pill. So these party supplies, he says, were kept in a bag called the MVP bag. According to Rolling Stone, who says it reviewed a copy of the lawsuit, Pines says he couldn't just leave the supplies in the hallway and walk away. No, he alleges he had to be let into the room, meaning he ended up seeing what was going on behind closed doors, so to speak. By the way, as you can see from a lot of the stories that we cover on Sidebar, it just goes to show you how important personal safety is. And by the way, that is especially true when it comes to protecting your privacy online. I think you would be shocked at how much of your personal information is out there, like your address, your phone number. Do you ever wonder why you get so many spam calls and emails? That's because all that information is all public. But that is where our sponsor, Incogni, comes in. So this is a service that helps you take control of your online privacy by removing your personal data from data brokers, the huge companies that sell and trade your information without your permission. Here's the kicker. These data brokers have to remove you from their database if you ask them to. Now you're thinking, I don't have time to call a data broker. Well, again, that's where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you. You don't have to do a thing. And then they alert you once that request has been completed. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. And right now, anybody who uses code SIDEBAR and Incogni.com/sidebar gets 60% off of an annual Incogni plan. Now, Mauricio, there's something very interesting here I want to talk about, is that Pines makes mention of the fact that he was exposed to what was allegedly going on inside these rooms, that he couldn't just drop the stuff off and leave. If those allegations are true, how does that impact the strength of his claim, the strength of this lawsuit? Because allegedly he's a key eyewitness.
He's a key eyewitness, and not only that, but he says that he was forced to look at the videos that memorialize these parties and these events when he was scrubbing the videos off of his phone. And he actually says that he was intimidated and threatened that if Sean Combs' family were to ever find the videos or images, that he would never work in the industry again. So not only was he live seeing the actual events that occurred, but he was also referenced to have to look at the videos and images that were when he had to scrub the phone. I mean, listen, this case is all encompassing to the point that P. Diddy has successfully vilified baby oil. And if anybody thinks that that's not true, this Valentine's, show up to your bedroom with a bottle of baby oil and see what your spouse says.
Wow.
They're not going to like it.
Look,
what is that?
I mean, what a year. What a year. One of the things is, the thing that stuck out to me, you mentioned it before, these allegations are so consistent with what the allegations are that are laid out by prosecutors when they describe the freak-offs in their indictment, right? These sex-fueled parties, these drug-fueled parties, the baby oil, the Astroglide. And it makes me wonder, A, do you think Mr. Pines is a cooperating witness for the government? B, if so, do you think he was one of the people that they originally spoke to when they were coming up with this, when they were drafting the indictment and coming up with the charges? Or do you think he's come out after? Because again, I think the timing of the lawsuit's important too, at the end of the year, right now. Talk to me about what you think his role might be.
If I had to guess, I would figure that the feds already talked to him, just because I know from my experience dealing with them how all-encompassing their investigations are. And if he really was his executive assistant from the time frame that they allege in the lawsuit, I can't see a scenario where they wouldn't. I mean, they investigate regular cases to the point that that I'm shocked when I see it as a criminal defense attorney with regular people. When you're talking about a high-profile celebrity case like this, I can't fathom that no one spoke to this individual prior to this. So I would think that they did speak to him. And I can't imagine that he's not a witness, because the way that they work is they want everybody that can corroborate their theory of the case to be on their witness list, or to be somebody that they could call. And I can't think that if he actually was his assistant for this time frame, he would be an excellent witness for them.
See, the problem is we don't know who the witnesses are in that criminal case yet. I don't know when we're going to know, maybe closer to trial, but you have to imagine that their case is built on more than just the testimony of one alleged victim, right? Victim one in the indictment. It has to be more. And even if we assume victim one is Cassandra Ventura, Combs' ex-girlfriend who filed that initial lawsuit against him, recounted a lot of these details that are consistent with the indictment, talking about the freak-offs and all this, it has to be more than just her. So when I hear something like this, I will tell you, out of a lot of the lawsuits that I've covered over the past several months, this is one of them, one of the few that I actually think is the most consistent with what prosecutors are charging Sean Combs with, right? Sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution. And it just makes me think that this is why he may play such a crucial role. We could be wrong, though.
And it also talks about Sean Combs physically attacking guests, that he kicked
Yeah.
somebody in the stomach, that he kicked somebody in the buttocks. So it's really tying together the theory that the prosecution has put out there in their indictment. And yeah, I mean, I believe that he is a witness. I mean, it's really mimicking a lot of the same things that the federal government is saying that Sean Combs was up to during this time period.
And because the government says, it was a racketeering conspiracy, it was a criminal enterprise. He had associates of his who would set up these events and also clean up these events, which, by the way, let me get back to this lawsuit. Because Pine says his role didn't just stop at preparing this. He also says he had to clean up these rooms afterwards. And the cleanup is not any less disturbing. According to the lawsuit, plaintiff would remove any evidence of drugs, condoms, sex toys, remove bodily stains like blood, urine, and fluids from any sheets, furniture, and pack away all the items used during Wild King nights. And all of this cleanup, he says, was also part of a cover-up so that no one would suspect anything was going on. And that alleged cover-up also included leaving very large tips for the housekeeping staff to essentially prevent them from reporting anything. And going even further into the duties of his supposed cleanup, this also extended, as we were talking about, to wiping Diddy's personal devices of any evidence. According to the lawsuit reviewed by Rolling Stone, plaintiff was further instructed to scrub Sean Combs' personal devices, including but not limited to personal phones, laptops, tablets, of any compromising videos. And by the way, unfortunately in doing so, he says he was once again unwillingly exposed to the alleged conduct that was occurring. In order to accomplish this unreasonable task, plaintiff would have to again unwillingly see the video and then erase it. Okay, Mauricio, let me ask you this. How does he prove this? How does he prove all this happened? Is it just his testimony? Will you try to subpoena those people to come forward? How do you prove something was deleted? Talk to me.
Well, first of all, I can only imagine how sloppy Sean Combs was with evidence when he got busted with those 2 machine guns or 3 machine guns with the altered serial numbers. So I really don't trust Sean Combs or the people around him's ability to properly cover up anything. So I envision that you're going to see a trial, payments from his Amex for flights for people, straight payments directly from his company to people. And then the time frame is important because this happened in hotels, in places that have surveillance, that there's records that could be consistent with his testimony about when he alleges that these parties took place. He probably has his own information about who attended the events. When you're somebody like Sean Combs and you're such a celebrity and you're engaged in this type of behavior, people around you are memorializing it on their own. So I feel like this guy probably was creating his case prior to him even filing this lawsuit back when it was happening. Because when you're, part of this, and if this is true, that he's, threatening you with the threat of being fired, with the threat of, being ostracized in the industry, he may have taken steps to memorialize this himself, saying, you know what, I may have to defend myself in the future, and I'm going to start keeping records of what's going on. So I wouldn't doubt it if we see something like that.
Does it hurt or help him that I'm talking about Mr. Pines, that he could be seen as an active participant in this, that he was complicit in it? Does it hurt his case? Does it hurt maybe if he takes the stand and testifies against Sean Combs at a criminal trial?
I mean, listen, it's a double-edged sword. If it hurts or it helps, yeah, he was complicit. He even admits in his lawsuit that he went as far as to start having sex with this woman when Sean Combs forced him, but then he felt bad. So a lot of people are going to be like, well, you felt bad about it, but you got an erection and you started to have sex with her. So how badly did you feel about it? And I'm sure that his lawyers, Sean Combs' lawyers, are going to attack that. Like, yeah, you were a willing participant. You actually had sex with this woman. You penetrated her. And all of a sudden, years later, you want to back out and say, I wasn't a willing participant. I was forced. And I think you're going to see that a lot in the criminal trial as well, where they're going to be like, oh, well, all of a sudden Sean Combs flew you to a destination, paid you $20,000 to take part in an orgy, gave you drugs, but you're the victim. You're the victim. You didn't want to do it. And I think that we're going to see that a lot, not only from Mr. Pines, but from a lot of the witnesses that are going to come forward in the actual case, where Sean Combs' attorneys are going to be, labeling them as willing participants in something that is not illegal. The problem is that, as we've discussed before, even if you were doing this on the regular since 2008, it's illegal. And it's illegal to pay somebody to cross state lines to perform a sex act. And it's illegal. And it's illegal to cross state lines with drugs, to have these orgies. This stuff's illegal.
Yeah. And one of the main underlying themes in the indictment, and I think you could argue here, is the element of using fraud, force, or coercion to force people to engage in these alleged sex acts. Because according to the review by Rolling Stone, Pines says if the devices, going back to the devices, for example, if the devices weren't wiped clean, he said there would be severe consequences. Plaintiff was instructed that if any of Sean Combs' family sees the videos, either on the personal device or cloud-based storage, plaintiff would be terminated with negative comments so that he could never be in the entertainment industry. That's something you mentioned, Mauricio. And I think that's interesting, by the way, on a side note. If that is true, why maybe in the face of all of these allegations, his family has stood by him, right? So if all of this is true, if all of this is true, and again, Sean Combs has not been found guilty. He's not been found liable in any of these lawsuits. But if all of this is true, it makes me wonder, did he compartmentalize his life and keep it away from his family because they have been backing him? So let's start there. So what do you think about that, Mauricio?
Well, I mean, listen, it seems to me from the lawsuit that I read involving his son that he really wasn't compartmentalizing anything with his son, because apparently his son was involved in these parties, at least the one on the super yacht that ended up in a lawsuit. The issue is, I mean, when you're Sean Combs' son and you're 20-something years old, and your dad isn't drawing boldly defined lines in what's acceptable and what's not, one can imagine that maybe his son was mimicking his father, committing the same mistakes as his father. And that's a problem because as we discussed before, the federal government loves superseding indictments and they love to rope in your family members. That may not be the issue in this case because they could lose the battle of public opinion. People may be like, wow, they're going too far in indicting his son. But that's something that I've seen a lot in my career. And I think a lot of criminal defense attorneys have seen.
So far, what we've said in the indictment, has Mr. Pines committed a crime? Why do I ask that? You think he has been offered some sort of immunity to testify? Again, assuming he would be a cooperating witness in a criminal case based on these allegations. Has he done something illegal by wiping the devices, by paying off the house staff, by cleaning things up where he would be offered immunity to testify against Sean Combs? I mean, maybe theoretically, he could be part of this sex trafficking operation or this racketeering operation. What's your thoughts?
Well, listen, anytime that, from what I've read, if they wanted to say that he was part of the conspiracy, they could, because anybody that helps in furtherance of the conspiracy can be roped into it. So if you were handing out drugs, if you were scrubbing devices, if you were, picking up sex workers at the airport and bringing them to the hotel, yeah, you're part of it. So I would envision that if the government wanted him to testify, they would offer him immunity, because you're right. Some of the things that he says could lead to, admissions of guilt and wrongdoing in the criminal sense. So I would envision that they would offer him immunity.
Interesting. Now, by the way, his responsibilities, we talked about him allegedly setting up and cleaning up these alleged escapades, but that is not where the lawsuit ends. Mauricio was talking about it before. There is another harrowing allegation of what could be considered sexual coercion in a very particularly graphic revelation where Pines claims that Diddy allegedly forced him to expose himself to a female guest at Diddy's command, to which Pines says he participated out of fear of consequences. And the way he says this played out, according to the lawsuit, began with Diddy allegedly massaging him, forcing him to take a shot of tequila before pushing him into a female guest. And remember how we mentioned that this was what the supposed meaning behind these Wild King nights was? Well, it's Rolling Stone who mentions that this appears in this lawsuit. Combs was sexually rubbing the shoulder of the plaintiff Pines, informing him to show loyalty to the king. And the next part is just graphic, but let me just say it involved Pines supposedly having sex with this female guest and then exposing himself to Combs as well. And now after, he says he went along with this because he was fearful. He was fearful. And then he steps out of the room, apparently upset. Mauricio, he's suing, my understanding, based on the reporting, for a number of causes of action here: sexual battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Does that apply to these circumstances, everything I've described so far?
Yeah, I mean, listen, intentional infliction of emotional distress based on what he's describing here is completely a count that could survive. I mean, everything that he's saying is the type of thing that it could be defended, but it's definitely something that Sean Combs has to worry about civilly. And they also sued his company, so it's not only him; it's Bad Boy Records, and it's a couple of other companies that under Sean Combs' control. The allegations, especially the ones that include violence, are pretty alarming. I listen. If I was cross-examining this guy, at the end of the day, he admits that he penetrated this woman. And if you penetrate somebody, there's an issue of were you aroused or not. I mean, are you forced or not? Did you want to or not? And when a man penetrates a woman, the argument is, and I'm sure this is going to come up in trial or in deposition, you wanted to do it. Right. At least at some level. You were erect and you penetrated her. So
well, I mean, the other way is look. The other way of flipping the narrative is like look who I'm around. Look what I'm witnessing. Look what he's doing. And you mentioned it before. Pines also alleges that he actually witnessed Combs kick a guest during a party. That during a birthday celebration in Turks and Caicos, Combs didn't tell anybody he had COVID. Actually gave another person COVID, and Pines was instructed to keep quiet. Again, we're talking about Sean Combs. Not in 2024, but Sean Combs years ago, who was at the height of his power, wealth, and fame. I mean, that is something that is a common theme throughout all these cases. And one of the reasons why you have seen a number of these lawsuits come out after Sean Combs was either indicted or arrested, and particularly after his bail was denied. So I think that was a big concept too, is that he no longer can attack you, and he can no longer be a threat to you. That at least is the allegation put forward and one of the reasonings that's been put forward by a number of his accusers. And by the way, let me just go back to this. So while Diddy, of course, is at the center of these allegations, as Mauricio said, in this lawsuit that was reviewed by Rolling Stone, he's named Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Entertainment, and a senior employee named Christina Coram. Now, Coram was mentioned in a filing by music producer Rodney Jones. I want to talk about that for a second here because Christina Coram is allegedly Sean Combs' right-hand woman. She's even been described as a sort of Ghislaine Maxwell-type figure to Combs. And we know, of course, that Maxwell is the woman who was convicted of trafficking young girls on behalf of her boss, Jeffrey Epstein, or her boyfriend, her accomplice, whatever you want to call him. Now, according to a complaint that we've talked about here before, this was filed by Rodney Jones, as the chief of staff, defendant Coram was instrumental in organizing and executing the RICO and TVPA enterprises. That's the sex trafficking enterprises. And of course, we can't be totally sure what her alleged role is in these Wild King nights, but that is just some background a little bit on Ms. Coram. And Mauricio, I want to circle back with you on this because I do wonder, Sean Combs is the only one being charged right now. The government's been a little bit cagey about whether or not there's going to be a superseding indictment. Why do you think there hasn't been additional charges? Do you think there would be charges against additional other people after Sean Combs' trial in May? Or do you think that is a situation where people are going to be cooperating with the government and testifying against him?
I think it's the latter. I think people are going to be cooperating with the government, testifying against them. I see it all the time in regular cases. I don't see why that would change in a case of this magnitude. And I believe that people around him must have been complicit. I think that he felt that he was above the law. This is somebody that got Obama to pardon one of his best friends that was in prison for drugs. This is somebody that actually thought that he was above the law. So I can only think that he was sloppy in the way that he did these crimes, that there's probably a trail of evidence, not only involving him, but everybody in his circle that he would, delegate these responsibilities to. And those people are, when they're faced with the reality of, hey, do you want to testify or do you want to, possibly do time? I think we're going to see a lot of people testifying against him.
And it's not that just even a power dynamic between an employer and employee. It's the power dynamic between a Sean Combs as your employer and you as the employee. I think that's going to be a big theme, as I mentioned before. Now, as for Sean Combs, we mentioned he's facing federal charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. He's pleaded not guilty to these charges. He's presumed innocent until proven guilty. But Combs' attorneys denied these allegations in this lawsuit, saying in a statement to Rolling Stone magazine, no matter how many lawsuits are filed, it won't change the fact that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted or sex trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. We live in a world where anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason. Fortunately, a fair and impartial judicial process exists to find the truth, and Mr. Combs is confident he will prevail in court. Real quick, Mauricio, before we wrap this up, he is right. He is innocent until proven guilty. If he is acquitted in his criminal trial, what happens to the other lawsuits? Do you think they still go forward?
Yeah, they go forward. You're dealing with a different bar regarding, whether it's reasonable doubt or preponderance of the evidence. You could be found in, not guilty of a criminal case, but they could have, more than enough evidence to convict you in a civil trial. These civil guys are looking for money. They're not going to stop no matter what, even if he's acquitted or not. It's a completely different threshold, and I don't see them stopping until they actually, get money from him, which is what they want.
But do you think that these plaintiffs who, as I mentioned, it seems that they came forward particularly after Combs was arrested and now he's been denied bail, if he is acquitted and he is released, do you think that they'll still want to go after him?
Well, listen, I think so, because their name's already in the media. They've already started, this fight. That means if he's acquitted and he's out and you're fearful of, retribution, you're still on his hit list no matter what, just because you started. Might as well finish it and might as well try and get your money. These lawsuits cost money. So the lawyers are going to be, on the hook for everything that they put forward regarding costs. So they're going to want to generate revenue from these lawsuits. So I don't think they're going to stop until they get money.
All right, Mauricio Padilla, good seeing you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, man. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.